Perhaps only those who have been through war truly understand its nature. It is hell on earth in the most literal sense. There is blood. There are tears. There is cruelty, deception, and betrayal. In war, the devil within us grows louder, stronger, and more relentless when we live too long at the edge between life and death. I once served America. And maybe, until my dying breath, I will still want to serve America. But I have always asked myself, is war ever truly necessary? We never wanted to be heroes. We never wanted to be killers. Yet compared to the murderers you see on the evening news, our hands were far more soaked in blood. I've long lost count of the lives we took. I am sitting on the porch of my small house in a quiet Midwestern town. The late afternoon sun spills gold over the street, but the air feels heavy. In front of me, the American flag I've kept since Vietnam hangs limp, its colors faded and its edges frayed. The wind catches it now and then as if reminding me of all it has seen. On the table beside me sits a battered reel-to-reel tape recorder, the same one they used in the prison camp. My hand hesitates over the switch. Then with a click, the tape begins to roll. A younger voice fills the air. My voice, shaky, hollow, exhausted. My name is Corporal William Harris, United States Marine Corps. I'm speaking to my fellow Americans today, to ask for an end to this war. It's strange hearing myself like that, as if I'm eavesdropping on a ghost. I remember the moment they forced me to say those words, their rifles pressed into my back, the smell of damp concrete in the cell, the metallic taste of fear in my mouth. I lean back in my chair and close my eyes. The sound of my younger self seems to pull me backward through time. The world around me fades, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of leaves, replaced by the relentless hum of jungle insects, the distant thump of artillery, and the cries that never truly leave you. I was barely 19 when I set foot in Vietnam. A boy from Ohio who thought he understood honor, duty, and courage. My father had fought in World War II and I wanted to follow his footsteps. I wanted to protect my country, make him proud. I thought wearing the uniform made me part of something noble. But somewhere between the rice paddies and the burning villages, between the orders barked by officers and the silent stares of civilians, I began to feel cracks forming in everything I believed. How does a boy from Ohio end up in a Viet Cong prison cell, questioning everything he's ever stood for? That's the story I've carried for decades, a story of choices, of survival, of shame, and of truths I wish I'd never learned. People think war is about bullets and bombs. It's not. War is about moments. Small ones. The moment you hesitate before pulling the trigger because the figure in your sights looks too young. The moment you smell burning flesh and realize it's human. The moment you see a comrade bleeding out in the mud and know you can't save him. And sometimes, war is about the moment you realize you are no longer fighting for freedom or democracy, but simply to survive the next day, and maybe to keep the man next to you alive. I still don't know if what we did was right. I know what we were told. I know the slogans, the speeches, the promises, but I also know the faces of those we left behind. The tape keeps playing, my younger voice spilling out the words I swore I'd never speak. I told them to stop the war. I told them American boys shouldn't die in a land they didn't understand. I said what they wanted me to say. What I didn't say was what it cost me to say it. I opened my eyes and watched the flag sway gently. It's still standing, though time has worn it thin. Just like me. This is not a story of glory. It's not the kind they show in recruitment posters. It's the kind that lives in the shadows, in the silences between medals and parades. It's the story of how a boy with a rifle became a man haunted by the sound of his own voice on a prison tape. And it all began long before that day in the jungle. I told you, it all began long before that day in the jungle. It began in a place that couldn't have been further from the sounds of war, a small town in Ohio during the 1960s. Back then, my world was painted in the colors of jukebox lights and the scratchy hum of vinyl records spinning rock and roll late into the night. The Beatles, Creedence Clearwater Revival, the Rolling Stones, they weren't just music, they were part of our bloodstream. Saturday evenings meant movies at the local theater, John Wayne on horseback, the hero who always stood tall, always shot straight, always did the right thing. For a boy like me, those films were a compass pointing toward some undefined idea of honor. Ohio summers smelled of cut grass and gasoline from lawnmowers. I'd help my father fix the family car, grease staining my hands, and he'd tell me stories from his service in World War II. His tales were a mix of pride and pain, but I always heard more of the pride. He'd talk about his unit, the friendships forged in mud, the quiet acts of bravery no one ever saw. And though he never said it outright, I could feel he believed that serving your country was the highest calling a man could answer. So when the recruiters came to our school, wearing crisp uniforms and promising a life of purpose, adventure, and brotherhood, I didn't need much convincing. I was 17 when I signed the papers, 18 when I began training, 19 when I shipped out. Boot camp was a world away from Ohio. A place where they stripped you down piece by piece until nothing was left but discipline and obedience. They told us we were Marines now, the tip of the spear. They told us we were the line between freedom and chaos. And I believed them. God help me, I believed every word. The day I put on that uniform for the first time, I stood a little taller. My mother cried, not because she was proud, though she said she was, but because she knew something I didn't. She'd seen the news. She'd watched young men march off to war and come back changed, if they came back at all. I boarded the plane to Vietnam with a rifle in my hands and a chest full of pride. The older Marines called it the Nam, like it was another planet. And in a way it was. When we landed, the first thing that hit me wasn't the sight, it was the air. Thick, wet, almost alive. It wrapped around you like it wanted to choke you. The tarmac shimmered under the sun, and in the distance, the green of the jungle looked endless, hiding whatever waited inside. The smells were stronger than anything I'd ever known. Diesel fuel. Damp earth. Something sweet, almost rotten, carried by the wind. And underneath it all, the faint bite of gunpowder, like the ground itself remembered every shot ever fired. The soundscape was overwhelming. Cicadas screaming from the trees, their pitch so high it felt like it drilled into your skull. Somewhere far off, the hollow thud of artillery. Closer, the mechanical cough of helicopters, the rotors chopping the air into jagged pieces. We were told we were here to win hearts and minds, to protect the innocent, to bring peace. Standing there in that sweltering air, sweat already running down my spine, I believed it. I thought I was here to save lives. I didn't know I was about to lose my own soul. We were loaded onto trucks, bouncing down roads that were more dirt than anything else. Villagers stared as we passed, some curious, some fearful, some expressionless in a way that made me uneasy. I told myself it was just because we were strangers, foreigners in their land. I didn't yet understand that for many of them, we were not saviors, we were just another army. The base was a patchwork of sandbags, tents, and metal shacks. The heat inside the tents was suffocating. Nights brought no relief, only a different kind of discomfort as the jungle came alive with sounds I didn't recognize. Some of those sounds were animals. Some weren't. In the first weeks, I threw myself into the routine, patrols, drills, cleaning my weapon until it gleamed. I told myself this was preparation, that this was how I'd keep myself and my brothers alive. There was comfort in the ritual, in the illusion that discipline could shield us from chaos. But the jungle was patient. It waited for you. It tested you in ways the recruiters never mentioned. And it had a way of stripping away whatever illusions you carried with you from home. I remember one of the older guys, Sergeant Miller, telling me, "Kid, out here the war's not what they told you. Keep your eyes open and don't believe everything you hear." I didn't know then just how right he was. Looking back now, I realized that those first days in Vietnam were the last time I saw the world in black and white. Very soon, everything would turn to shades of gray. I had been in Vietnam for barely 2 months when the order came down. It was early morning, the sky still gray, the air heavy with the smell of last night's rain. Our platoon gathered around Captain Reynolds. He was a tall, square-jawed man whose voice was as flat as his eyes. No ceremony, no build-up. Just words that would carve themselves into my memory. No hesitation. Shoot anything that moves. Villagers, farmers, women, children, they can all be Viet Cong. We clear the area. Understood. The words hit me harder than the humidity. My first thought was that I must have misheard him. We were here to protect civilians, weren't we? But no one spoke up. A few of the older guys nodded, some without looking him in the eye. I stood there frozen, my M16 suddenly heavier. We moved out at first light, boots sinking into the muddy track as we headed toward a cluster of huts marked on our map. The village was small, maybe 20 homes surrounded by rice paddies. From a distance, it looked almost peaceful, smoke curling lazily from cooking fires, the faint sound of voices carrying over the water. Then the gunfire started. It came from somewhere to our left, a short, sharp burst. Reynolds barked for us to spread out. The air filled with the mechanical cough of rifles. Villagers screamed. Chickens scattered in a panic, wings beating against the dust. I saw movement near one of the huts. Through my scope, I made out a woman holding something in her arms. A bundle wrapped in cloth. My finger was on the trigger before my brain caught up. Was it a baby? Was it a weapon? The shouting around me blurred into a single roar. Reynolds was yelling something, but I couldn't hear the words. My pulse was too loud. The woman's eyes met mine, wide, terrified, but not defiant. I didn't pull the trigger. I couldn't. She disappeared into the hut. Next to me, Corporal Jenkins fired into the doorway without hesitation. The bundle tumbled to the ground. I looked away before I could see what was inside. We pushed through the village, clearing huts one by one. The smell of gunpowder mixed with smoke and something far more pungent, the smell of blood. Every face we saw blurred together. Some angry, some pleading, some lifeless. By the time we regrouped, my hands were trembling. I kept telling myself I'd followed orders, or at least I hadn't directly disobeyed them. But deep down something had shifted. That night, lying in my cot, the image of the woman's eyes kept returning. I told myself she might have been hiding a weapon. I told myself we'd done what we had to do. But the truth was simpler and harder. I didn't know. And not knowing was its own kind of wound. 2 weeks later we were sent out again, same captain, same orders. This time, the mission was to sweep a different village suspected of harboring Viet Cong fighters. The air was hot and thick, the kind of heat that clung to your skin like a wet blanket. We moved in staggered formation along a narrow trail. The jungle pressed close on both sides, every rustle and shadow a potential threat. Halfway there, the lead point man triggered a booby trap. The explosion was deafening. Dirt and leaves rained down as shrapnel whined past my ears. When the dust cleared, Private Ellis was on the ground, screaming, clutching what was left of his leg. We dragged him to the side, applying a tourniquet, but the bleeding wouldn't stop. His eyes locked onto mine, wild with pain and fear. "Don't let me die here," he gasped. The medic worked frantically, but it was useless. By the time the chopper arrived, Ellis was gone. They loaded him up like just another piece of gear, the rotors kicking up dirt as they lifted away. We kept moving. Reynolds didn't slow us down for long. His jaw was set, his voice hard. "Stay sharp. Keep your eyes open. Remember the orders." When we reached the village, the tension was a living thing. I scanned the horizon, my rifle sweeping from one shadow to the next. A boy darted across the open space between two huts, maybe 12 years old, barefoot, skinny as a rail. In his hand was something shiny. "Gun," someone shouted. I aimed, but my finger wouldn't move. It wasn't a rifle. It was a metal cooking pot. The boy froze when he saw me, then bolted. Someone else fired. He fell face first into the dirt, the pot clattering away. My stomach turned to stone. I wanted to shout to stop it all, but the noise, the orders, the chaos, it swallowed me whole. We secured the village, but it didn't feel like victory. On the way back to base, the rain started. The dirt path became a river of mud, sucking at our boots. I kept seeing Ellis in that mud, his blood mixing with the rainwater. I kept seeing the boy's small body crumpled in the dust. Back in my tent, I tried to clean my rifle, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept replaying the moment I saw the boy, the split second where I could have acted differently, shouted a warning, done something. That's when it hit me, the real wound wasn't in my flesh, it was in my conscience. War doesn't give you warnings. One moment, you're moving through the jungle in formation, scanning the tree line, listening to the rhythm of your own breath. The next, the world explodes. It was early afternoon, the sun filtering through the canopy in fractured beams. We were on a routine patrol, at least that's what they called it. No mission is ever routine in Vietnam. I was near the middle of the column when the first shot cracked through the air. It wasn't just one shot. It was an orchestra of chaos, rifles barking from the undergrowth, the sharp whoosh of RPGs, the metallic ping of rounds hitting metal. The air filled with the smell of gunpowder and the high-pitched whine of ricochets. Contact left, someone yelled. We scattered for cover, returning fire, but it was like shooting into a wall of green. I could barely see shapes moving between the trees. The radio operator went down first. I saw him clutch his chest, the handset slipping from his hand. I scrambled toward him, but a burst of fire chewed the ground in front of me. By the time I reached the spot, the radio was shattered. Our lifeline was gone. We tried to regroup, but the enemy was everywhere, invisible, fast, relentless. I heard someone shout my name, but then a flash of movement caught my eye. I turned too late. Something slammed into the side of my head. The world tilted, blurred. When I came to, my rifle was gone, my hands bound. A shadow loomed over me, speaking in rapid Vietnamese I couldn't understand. I tried to stand, but my legs were weak, my vision swimming. They marched me away from the firefight, deeper into the jungle. Every step took me further from my unit, further from any hope of rescue. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to begin the longest journey of my life, one that wouldn't be measured in miles, but in days of hunger, nights of fear, and the slow erosion of whatever part of me still believed I was in control. They brought me to a small compound surrounded by bamboo fencing. The first thing that hit me was the smell, damp earth, unwashed bodies, something sour and rotting beneath it all. The cell they threw me into was barely big enough to stretch my legs. The walls wept with condensation, the floor slick with mud. There was a constant dripping somewhere in the darkness. At first, I thought it would drive me insane. Later, I realized it was the only thing marking time. The guards rarely spoke to me except to bark orders. I was given a bowl of thin rice porridge twice a day, sometimes less. At night, the mosquitoes descended like a living blanket. I learned to sleep in short bursts, my back against the wall, my arms wrapped around myself for warmth. The first interrogation came on my second day. They dragged me into a small room lit by a single bulb. A man in a dark shirt sat behind a table, his eyes calm but sharp. Another stood behind me, his presence heavy. They wanted names, units, locations. I told them nothing. The man behind me slammed a fist into my ribs. I gasped, tasting blood. They tried everything, threats, promises, silence. They kept me awake for days, shining a light in my face, asking the same questions over and over until the words blurred. I bit my tongue, not out of bravery but because speaking felt like letting go of the only thing I still owned, my silence. I didn't know how long I'd been there. Days bled into nights and nights into days. My world shrank to the sound of water dripping and the smell of mold. I began to understand that this was not about survival in the way I'd known it in combat. This was survival of the mind. One night, without warning, they woke me and shoved me outside. The moon was a thin sliver, barely enough to light the path. My hands were tied, my ankles bound loosely enough to shuffle. They pushed me onto the back of a truck. We drove for hours, the jungle giving way to open fields, then back to jungle again. At dawn, we stopped at another camp, larger, noisier. The air here carried the acrid tang of smoke from a nearby fire. This prison had more cells, more guards, more prisoners. Some were Americans, others South Vietnamese soldiers. We communicated in glances, nods, language stripped down to its bare essentials. The conditions were worse here. The cell was darker, the air thicker. Food was scarcer, water often murky. The guards were harsher, quicker to strike. Weeks passed. Then another transfer. Each move felt like being erased and rewritten in a new chapter of the same nightmare. One camp was deep in the mountains, the cold at night gnawing through my bones. Another was by a river, the sound of rushing water a cruel reminder of the freedom I didn't have. The interrogations followed me everywhere. Sometimes they beat me. Sometimes they just waited, letting hunger and exhaustion do their work. I started losing track of the seasons. My body grew thinner, my clothes hung loose, my skin took on the gray of someone who lived without sunlight. At some point, I realized they weren't trying to break just my body. They were looking for something else, something deeper. The fourth prison was smaller, almost quiet. That should have been a relief, but it wasn't. Quiet meant isolation, and isolation was its own kind of torture. On my third day there, they brought me into a room I hadn't seen before. In the center was an old reel-to-reel tape recorder, the kind you'd find in an office back home. The man behind the table didn't ask me questions. Instead, he slid a sheet of paper toward me. It was a statement, written in English, calling for the American government to withdraw troops, to end the war. My name was at the bottom, waiting for my voice. I pushed it back. No. They didn't argue. They just nodded to the guards who dragged me out. That night, they kept me awake, forcing me to stand in the middle of my cell until my legs shook. The next day, the paper was back in front of me. Days passed like this. The paper, my refusal, the punishment. Eventually, hunger, exhaustion, and the unending pressure wore me down. I told myself it didn't matter, that no one would believe it anyway. But when they switched on the tape recorder and I heard my own voice reading those words, something inside me cracked. They didn't just want my body, they wanted my truth. The worst part wasn't speaking the words. The worst part was hearing them back, knowing it was me, knowing it would be played somewhere far away to people who once believed in me. When they took me back to my cell, I sat in the dark for a long time, the sound of my voice still echoing in my head. I didn't know if I'd ever get out. I didn't know if, even if I did, I'd still be the same man. When you've been locked in a cell long enough, the walls stop being just wood and stone. They turn into mirrors. And in those mirrors, you see every moment you've tried to forget. That's what those months in captivity did to me. They stripped away the noise, the distractions, until all I had left was my own mind, and the memories it wouldn't let go of. At night, when the guards' footsteps faded and the jungle went quiet, I would lie on the cold floor and think about every order I'd ever followed. I thought about that morning when Captain Reynolds told us to shoot anything that moves. I thought about the woman in the village, the boy with the cooking pot. I could still see their faces as clearly as if they were sitting across from me in the cell. During training, they had painted us a picture of the enemy, ruthless, faceless, almost inhuman. Viet Cong, they said, were shadows that slipped through the jungle at night, planting traps, killing without mercy. They told us the only way to survive was to be faster, harder, more ruthless than them. And for a while, I believed that. But Vietnam has a way of tearing down whatever story you brought with you. The first time I looked into the eyes of a captured enemy soldier, I didn't see a monster. I saw a boy, maybe a year younger than me, with mud on his face and fear in his eyes. I thought about the villagers too. The old man who offered us water even after we'd searched his home, the mother who clutched her child when helicopters passed overhead, the farmer who kept working his field even as gunfire echoed in the distance. These weren't the shadows from the training films. They were people. People who had to live with war every single day long after we left their land. The propaganda back home told a simple story. We were fighting for freedom, they were fighting for oppression. But in that cell, I started to see the cracks in that story. We were told to protect civilians, yet ordered to treat them all as potential enemies. We were told to bring peace, yet we brought the sounds of gunfire and explosions. I realized then that the battlefield isn't just out there, in the jungle or the streets of a village. It's inside you, between the man you thought you were and the man you become when you follow orders that tear your soul apart. The thing about war is that it doesn't end when the last shot is fired. That's just when the real war begins, the one in your head. I used to think the end of the war would be marked by silence. No more helicopters, no more artillery, no more screaming. But in prison I learned that war doesn't end when the shooting stops. It ends when the lies stop. And the lies aren't just the ones they tell you. They're the ones you tell yourself. You tell yourself you were protecting freedom. You tell yourself the people you shot were dangerous. You tell yourself that what you did was necessary. You tell yourself all of this because the alternative, admitting you killed someone who didn't need to die, would crush you. But the silence of prison had a way of peeling those lies away. I remembered every briefing where the official story was handed to us like ammunition. I remembered the speeches from officers, the leaflets from home, the news reports that painted our mission in colors so bright you couldn't see the blood underneath. The truth was uglier. War, as I had lived it, was not about right or wrong. It was about power. About men in offices making decisions that would never cost them a drop of their own blood. About controlling a map, a resource, an idea, and letting young men kill each other to decide who got to hold it. I thought about the Viet Cong guards who watched me every day. Some were cruel, some indifferent, a few even curious. They had their own propaganda, their own lies to live by. And I realized we weren't so different in that way. We were all caught in a story someone else had written, fighting for lines in a script that didn't belong to us. One night, after they'd taken me to record the anti-war message, I lay awake replaying my own voice in my head. I'd said the words because I wanted the pain to stop, because I thought maybe it didn't matter. But in that dark, I understood it did matter, because the truth wasn't in the words I'd spoken, it was in the fact that I'd been made to speak them. War takes your body first, it wears it down with hunger, fatigue, and wounds. Then it goes after your mind. And if it can, it will take your truth, twist it, and hand it back to you so you can't even recognize it anymore. When I finally walked out of that prison months later, I didn't feel free. I felt emptied. I'd left pieces of myself in each cell, with each beating, with each lie I'd told myself to get through another day. But I also carried something I hadn't had before. The understanding that if we ever wanted wars to end, we had to stop building them on lies. We had to stop telling ourselves the stories that made them possible. And maybe that's the hardest battle of all, because those lies don't live on the battlefield. They live at home, in the hearts of people who have never seen war but believe they know what it is. When you've been in darkness long enough, you forget the shape of light. I didn't know what day it was. I didn't know what month it was. Time in prison wasn't measured in days, it was measured in moments of pain, brief snatches of sleep, and the hollow sound of my own breathing in the dark. Then one morning the guards came to my cell and told me to stand. There was no shove, no curse, no barked order. Just stand. I thought it was another transfer, another camp, another stretch of uncertainty. But when they marched me out into the yard, I saw other prisoners, Americans, South Vietnamese, all gathered, blinking against the morning sun. A man in a plain uniform stood before us, reading something in Vietnamese. I couldn't understand all the words, but I caught enough. Paris Peace Accords, prisoners, released. The words felt unreal, like a story someone else was living. I didn't believe them until they put us on trucks, drove us through roads I hadn't seen in years, and stopped at a clearing where helicopters waited. As the rotors began to spin, a strange fear gripped me. I dreamed of this moment, freedom, for so long. But now that it was here, I wasn't sure I knew how to step into it. When the helicopter lifted, the ground falling away beneath us, the jungle stretched out like an endless green ocean. I watched it pass below, feeling something I couldn't name, relief, grief, and an odd sense that part of me was staying behind. Hours later, I stepped off onto an American base. The air smelled different, cleaner, but almost too clean. Someone handed me fresh clothes, a hot meal. I ate slowly, my stomach unaccustomed to food that wasn't thin rice or watery broth. They told us we'd be flown home within days. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there staring at the ceiling, trying to imagine what home even meant anymore. The flight back to the States was quiet. No one knew what to say. We were going home, yes, but we were also leaving behind parts of ourselves we would never recover. When we landed, there were people waiting, flags waving, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. They clapped when we walked down the ramp. I could see smiles, hear cheers, but none of it reached me. A woman pressed a bouquet into my hands. Someone shook my arm hard, saying, "Welcome home, Marine." I nodded, but inside I thought, "You have no idea what I've brought back with me." They saw uniforms, medals, scars they could count. They didn't see the other scars, the ones stitched into my mind. They didn't hear the screams that still rang in my ears when I closed my eyes. I tried to fit back into the world I'd left. I went to the diner where I used to eat breakfast, but the coffee tasted wrong. The jukebox played a song I knew by heart, but it felt like it belonged to someone else's life. I'd walk down familiar streets and feel like a stranger in my own hometown. At night, the dreams came. Sometimes I was back in the jungle, the heat pressing in, the smell of gunpowder thick in my nose. Sometimes I was in the cell again, the drip of water echoing in the dark. I'd wake up soaked in sweat, my hands clenched as if still holding a rifle. I avoided crowds. Loud noises made my heart race. A car backfiring could send me straight back to the firefight in my head. Friends from before the war didn't know how to talk to me anymore, and I didn't know how to talk to them. My family tried. They asked questions, but I could see the unease in their eyes when I told even small pieces of the truth. So I stopped telling it. I learned to wear a mask, to smile when expected, to say, "I'm fine," when I wasn't. The truth was, home felt more foreign than the jungle I left behind. I started to realize that the war had followed me back. Not in the form of an enemy, but as a shadow I couldn't shake. PTSD, that's what they'd call it years later. Back then, it was just having trouble adjusting, and you were expected to get over it. But you don't get over war. You carry it. Every face, every sound, every smell, they travel with you, stitched into your memory. And sometimes they come alive again without warning. I kept thinking about the people I'd left behind, the ones who didn't make it home, the ones who were still missing. I thought about the villages we'd passed through, the people who had to rebuild their lives in the ruins we left. It struck me that my return wasn't the end of the war. For me, and for so many others, the war would keep going in our heads long after the last bullet was fired. And for the people who lived in Vietnam, the war had never truly left at all. Some nights I'd walk outside and look up at the stars. I'd think about the sky over the jungle, the same sky I'd seen while lying in the mud, waiting for the next attack. I wondered if somewhere, half a world away, someone else was looking at those same stars and remembering the same war from the other side. I didn't have answers. I didn't have closure. But I had survived. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. When I came home, people saw the scars on my arms and the limp in my walk, and they assumed those were the worst of my injuries. They didn't know the truth, that the real wounds weren't the ones you could see. The visible scars were just proof that I'd been there, proof of the bullets, shrapnel, and accidents that came with war. But the invisible ones, the ones carved deep into my mind, those were the real burden. At first, I thought I could simply will them away. I told myself I was strong enough, that I'd faced worse in the jungle. But the mind doesn't work like that. It doesn't forget because you tell it to. It doesn't heal just because time passes. The nightmares didn't stop. I'd be asleep in my bed in Ohio, but in my head, I was back in the jungle, crouched behind a tree, sweat pouring down my back, the sound of an M60 hammering in my ears. Sometimes I'd wake up shouting, sometimes in total silence, my heart pounding as if I'd just sprinted for my life. Even in daylight, the war found me. A car backfiring, a helicopter flying overhead, the smell of gasoline, they could all pull me right back into a moment I thought I'd left behind. My body would tense, my pulse quicken, my mind scanning for threats that weren't there. I tried to explain it once to an old friend. He listened, nodding, but when I looked into his eyes, I saw it. That polite distance, the discomfort of someone who doesn't know what to say. After that, I stopped trying. For a long time, I carried it alone. And carrying it alone made it heavier. Eventually, I found myself at a gathering for veterans. I didn't really want to go, but something, maybe curiosity, maybe desperation, pushed me through the door. The room was full of men with the same look in their eyes that I saw in the mirror every morning. Some wore their old unit caps, some wore jackets with patches and pins, but all of them carried the same weight. No one asked for explanations. No one needed them. When one man talked about waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, the others just nodded. When someone else mentioned avoiding fireworks on the 4th of July, no one laughed, they understood. That's when I realized that part of healing wasn't about getting over it. It was about finding the people who didn't need you to explain why you couldn't. I started going more often. I listened more than I spoke at first. Then one night I told a story, not the whole war, just one moment. The room was quiet when I finished. One man put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Yeah, I've been there." Those 4 words carried more comfort than any speech, any parade, any medal ever could. Over time, I found other ways to make sense of what I'd been through. I started writing. At first, it was just notes in a battered notebook. Half-formed thoughts, fragments of memories, the kind of things that kept me up at night. Then, slowly, those notes became pages. The pages became chapters. I didn't write for anyone else. I wrote for me, to take the chaos in my head and give it shape, to put it somewhere outside myself so I could breathe a little easier. It wasn't easy. Some days the words came like a flood. Other days I couldn't bring myself to open the notebook at all. But the more I wrote, the more I realized that these stories, my stories, weren't just about me. They were about all of us who had lived through it, and all of us who carried the war home inside us. I met other veterans who wrote too. Some had published books. Some kept their writing locked in drawers. But we all agreed on one thing. Telling the story, even if only to yourself, was a way of fighting back against the silence. Still, no matter how much I wrote, no matter how many conversations I had, some things never went away. There were decisions I'd made in the war that still haunted me. Orders I'd followed that I wished I hadn't. People I'd seen die because I couldn't get to them in time. I replayed those moments over and over, looking for ways I could have changed them. A different step, a different choice, a different word. But the past doesn't rewrite itself, no matter how many times you run it through your head. And that's when I learned another truth. Some wounds you can stitch up. Others, you just carry. You carry them in the way you flinch at sudden noises, in the way you avoid certain streets, in the way you can't watch certain movies without feeling the weight in your chest. You carry them in the spaces between your words, in the pauses you take before answering a simple question. They become part of you. You don't want them, but they're there, stitched into your skin like invisible thread. I've met people who think healing means forgetting. They don't understand that forgetting isn't the goal, living with it is. The scars on my skin remind me of what my body endured. The scars in my mind remind me of what my soul survived. Both are part of the same story, and both are proof that I'm still here. Maybe that's what survival really is. Not erasing the pain, but learning how to walk with it without letting it crush you. And so I keep meeting with the other veterans. I keep writing in my notebook. I keep telling the stories when I can and holding them close when I can't. The war will always be a part of me. But I've learned that I can choose what to do with that part. I can let it rot in the dark, or I can let it see the light. Some days the choice feels easy. Other days it feels impossible. But every day I make it, I take one step further from the man who came home in body but not in spirit. When you've carried the weight of war long enough, you start to wonder what, if anything, you can pass on from it. I'm not talking about medals or uniforms, or stories to make people nod and thank you for your service. I'm talking about the truth, the kind that doesn't fit neatly into speeches or history books. Over the years, I've met young men and women full of fire, ready to serve, ready to do their part. I recognize that look in their eyes because I once had it myself. And I always tell them the same thing. Understand war before you cheer for it. It's easy to wave a flag, to stand in a crowd chanting slogans, to believe you're part of something noble. It's harder to look into the eyes of someone who's lost everything because of a decision made in a room thousands of miles away. War will ask more from you than you think you can give, and then it will keep asking. It will take your friends, your sleep, your peace of mind. And if you're not careful, it will take your truth. The truth I've come to know is that bravery isn't in pulling the trigger, it's in questioning why you were told to aim in the first place. I went to Vietnam as a soldier. I left it as a witness to the orders that blurred the line between enemy and civilian. A witness to the fear in the eyes of both sides. A witness to the way war doesn't just destroy buildings and bodies, it destroys the things you can't rebuild, like trust, hope, and innocence. If I have one thing to offer the next generation, it's this. War isn't a story you can understand from the outside. Don't let anyone sell it to you wrapped in glory without showing you the cost. Sometimes, late at night, I still take out that old tape recorder. The one they used when they made me read their words. It's scratched and dented, the reel stiff from age. I put in the tape, hear the faint hiss before my own voice begins, younger, thinner, full of exhaustion. I listen for a few moments and then I reach out and turn it off. That click, the soft mechanical stop, is my way of closing the chapter. Not erasing it because you can't erase war, but choosing when to stop letting it speak louder than the rest of my life. On my porch, the wind tugs at a flagpole. The American flag hanging there is old now, its colors dulled by sun and rain. The edges are frayed, the fabric worn thin. It still flies. It still catches the wind. But it will never be what it once was. I look at it and see the reflection of my own belief in the things I once thought unshakable. The flag is still there. My faith is still there. But both have been through too much to be untouched. If you've stayed with me through this story, then you've walked with me through the jungle, the prison cell, the return home, and the long years after. You've seen what war can do to a body, to a mind, to a soul. Now I ask you for one thing. Don't let these words just be another story you hear and forget. Carry them. Question the stories you're told. And when someone asks you what war is, don't give them the movie version. Give them the truth. Because the truth might be the only thing that can keep us from repeating it. If this story has stayed with you, share it. Talk to the veterans in your life. Listen, really listen, to what they carry. And when the time comes to decide whether to raise a flag for war or for peace, remember the cost written in the lives of those who've already paid it.